I never imagined my life, my carefully built, seemingly perfect life would start to fall apart because of a misplaced phone. But that's how it began. Not with a bang, but with a buzz. It was a rainy Wednesday, the kind where the sky stays gray all day and the air feels heavy. I had just finished cleaning the living room when I noticed Chris's phone buzzing on the couch. That alone was odd. Chris never left his phone out. It was always in his pocket or face down on his desk. I picked it up, planning to set it on the table. But the screen lit up before I could move. One text preview changed everything. Last night was unforgettable. Can't stop thinking about you. My heart dropped. It wasn't from me. With shaking hands, I unlocked the phone. The passcode was the same, as if he had nothing to hide.
But inside were dozens of messages flirtatious.
Late-night confessions, photos I wish I'd never seen. They spanned months. The sender? Just the letter D. I didn't confront him that night. Instead, I smiled. I cooked dinner. I laughed at his jokes. But inside, something had cracked. I needed answers before I acted. I needed to know who D was. That night, while Chris slept peacefully beside me, I lay staring at the ceiling, replaying every suspicious moment over the past few months, the late meetings, the missed calls, the distant look in his eyes. One name kept floating to the surface of my thoughts. Daniel, my younger brother. We used to be close, but lately he'd grown distant. He stopped dropping by, avoided family dinners, and when we did meet, he barely looked Chris in the eye. No, it couldn't be. That was too twisted, too impossible. Still, my gut wouldn't let it go. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, watching Chris sip his coffee like nothing was wrong. I looked at the man I'd built a life with, the man I thought I knew, and all I could think was, how long have you been lying to me? My name is Maya Lopez, and this is the story of how I discovered that the people closest to me were hiding the darkest truth imaginable. It all began with a whisper, the kind of whisper that wasn't spoken aloud, but woven into the way someone avoids your eyes. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I noticed it. I was folding laundry in the living room, soft, mundane things like my husband's flannel shirts and my daughter's pastel socks. Nothing dramatic, nothing unusual, until I heard it. A pause in the hallway, a breath held too long, and then silence. My husband, James, stood just outside the doorway. His phone was pressed tightly to his ear, and though I could only hear fragments, the tone of his voice. It was off, too soft, too urgent. I told you I'd call when it's safe, he muttered, voice nearly a whisper. Safe? That one word rattled something in my chest. I didn't move, not even when he glanced in and gave me a brief smile. One of those smiles that looks real, but dies in the eyes before it reaches the soul. He walked away quickly, almost guiltily, and I stood there, holding a still warm shirt in my hands, my knuckles going pale. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. James was a private man. He kept things to himself, work stress, family issues, even small frustrations. But this didn't feel like something small. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, I brought it up casually over dinner. Who were you on the phone with earlier? I asked, pretending to sip tea, though my throat had gone dry. He didn't flinch. Just work. A client. But something in his tone was too smooth, like someone who'd rehearsed the lie a dozen times before saying it out loud. I wanted to press further, but I didn't. Instead, I nodded, forced a smile, and let it pass. But that smile cracked the moment I turned away. I felt it fracture like porcelain. Something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong you fix with a talk or a hug. This was the kind of wrong that grows in the dark and blooms in the silence. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the soft hum of our fan and the quiet breathing of the man I wasn't sure I knew anymore. James hadn't changed overnight. It had been subtle, so subtle I almost missed it. Fewer touches, more late nights at work, less laughter, more absences at school events, and now secret phone calls in hushed tones. And yet, the most disturbing part wasn't what I suspected. It was how familiar it all felt. Like a story I'd heard before, like something I should have seen coming. I reached for my journal and flipped to the last page I'd written in. There was an entry from 3 months ago. I don't know what's wrong, but I feel it in my bones. He's hiding something. I just don't know what. Now I was sure. And I knew no matter how much it hurt, I had to find out the truth even if it destroyed me. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I wasn't the type to snoop. At least I never used to be. But desperation has a way of redrawing the lines you once thought were solid. When someone you love begins to feel like a stranger, It turns every ordinary day into a minefield of doubt. James left earlier than usual. Claimed he had a meeting downtown. He kissed my cheek, barely making eye contact, and was out the door before I could even ask which client he was meeting. I stood at the kitchen window and watched his car pull out of the driveway, a pit settling in my stomach. I waited 5 minutes. 10. And then I did something I'd never done in our entire marriage. I picked up his laptop. It was password protected, of course, but I'd seen him type the code enough times to remember. My fingers trembled slightly as I entered it. The screen lit up. My heart pounded. This felt wrong, like stepping into a room I wasn't supposed to be in. But it also felt necessary. The truth had become something I needed more than sleep. More than comfort, more than anything. I started with his emails. Nothing out of the ordinary. Work correspondence, newsletters, some receipts. Then I moved to his browser history. That's where the first thread unraveled. A series of searches. Hotels in the next town over. Restaurant reservations, 2 people. One reservation stood out. La Bella Vita. A romantic Italian place we'd never been to together. The date? 2 days ago. I swallowed hard. I checked his text messages next. Most were clean, but one number didn't have a name, only a string of digits. I opened the conversation. My breath caught. Can't stop thinking about yesterday. When can I see you again? Same place Thursday? And James's replies. I'll make it work. She won't suspect anything. Thursday's good. Can't wait. That word she sent a jolt through my chest. That was me. I was the she in the shadows of their plans. I sat back, the room spinning. For a long time I didn't move, didn't breathe. The betrayal wasn't just in the messages. It was in every moment he had smiled at me while lying, every dinner we'd shared while he was mentally elsewhere, every kiss that meant nothing. I felt like a fool. But then, another emotion surged in to drown the sorrow. Resolve. I wasn't going to fall apart. Not yet. Not until I had everything. I needed more. Proof. Something concrete. Something that would take away the tiny shred of denial still clinging to my heart. So I did something even riskier. I took his spare car key, grabbed a jacket, and drove to the hotel. I didn't know exactly what I expected to find. Maybe a clue, a forgotten receipt, a confirmation that all of this wasn't just my imagination spiraling out of control. The hotel was modest, nothing flashy, just enough to go unnoticed. It was the kind of place people went when they didn't want to be seen. I parked across the street and sat for a few minutes, my heart racing as I stared at the sign blinking quietly in the overcast morning light. Laurel Pines Inn. I'd never been here before, but someone I loved had. I stepped out of the car, pulled my jacket tighter, and crossed the street. The cold air was sharp against my skin, like it wanted to keep me awake focused. I walked into the lobby, past a pot of coffee brewing on the side table, and approached the front desk. The woman behind the counter looked up and gave me a polite smile. Good morning. Can I help you? I hesitated. Then I forced a smile of my own. Yes, I think I may have left something here. My husband checked in a few days ago. I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday. James Whitmore. The name felt sour on my tongue. She typed into her computer and nodded slowly. Yes, he was here Wednesday night. Room 214. My throat tightened. Did he check in alone? Her eyes flicked up to me, curious, but too professional to ask. I'm afraid I can't share guest details. Of course, I said quickly. I understand. But I didn't need her to say it. The room number was enough. I thanked her and stepped outside. The air colder now, or maybe I just felt colder inside. I stood on the curb and stared at the building for a while. At the windows of the second floor. Which one was 214? Had he looked out from behind one of those curtains while I was home waiting for him? The thought made me sick. Back in the car, I sat for a long time, just staring at my hands on the steering wheel. They didn't feel like mine. None of this felt real. I kept hearing the words from his messages over and over in my head. She won't suspect anything. Well, I did now. I drove home in silence. No radio, no tears. Just numbness. I didn't know what I was going to do next. But I knew I couldn't keep pretending nothing was wrong. That night, I didn't confront him. Instead, I played the role I had always played. The devoted wife. The loving partner. I made dinner. I laughed at his story about work. I kissed him goodnight and curled up next to him in bed, pretending I wasn't drowning inside, because I needed more. I needed to know who she was. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face anyone. I couldn't sit at my desk pretending to care about emails or meetings when my entire world was unraveling. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. I was going to find her. I didn't know her name. I didn't even know what she looked like. But I had a few clues, timestamps on messages, vague mentions in conversations. That hotel room. And if there was one thing I'd learned over the years of managing our household, keeping calendars, remembering birthdays and appointments and passwords, it was how to notice details. I scrolled through our shared phone bill, looking for unfamiliar numbers. There were a few, but one stood out frequent, especially late at night or during lunch hours. Always short. Always when he said he was too busy to talk to me. I dialed the number with shaking hands. It rang once, twice. Then voicemail. Hi, you've reached Lila. Leave a message and I'll get back to you. Leela. I didn't recognize the voice. It was young. Sweet. The kind of voice that would have made me feel inferior 10 years ago. I didn't leave a message. I just sat there, letting her name echo in my ears. Leela. I typed it into social media, not expecting much. But within minutes, there she was. Her profile was private, but her photo said enough. Long brown hair, bright smile. A woman in her late 20s. She looked like the kind of girl you'd see laughing too loudly at brunch with. Friends, harmless, beautiful, the opposite of threatening. And yet she was tearing my life apart. James was 12 years older than her. What could they possibly have in common? I scrolled down and saw something that made my stomach twist. A photo from a company retreat 6 months ago. James was in the background, half blurry, holding a drink. She'd tagged the event as corporate getaway with some cheesy beach caption. My husband didn't even mention it to me. I remember asking why he was late that night. He said traffic. Traffic. I looked at the date, then at our calendar. That was the same weekend he said he was visiting his brother in the hospital. A complete lie. I felt nauseous. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was layered. Thoughtful. He was building stories on top of stories, and I was believing every one of them, because I trusted him, because I loved him, and that made me feel like a fool. That afternoon, I stared at the screen for a long time. I could have messaged her. I could have called. But I didn't, not yet. I wasn't ready to confront her or him. I needed a plan. That night, James came home like nothing was wrong. He kissed my cheek, dropped his bag by the door, and asked what was for dinner. I stood frozen in the kitchen, staring at the pan on the stove, trying to remember what I was even cooking. He didn't notice. He just kept talking, rambling on about his day, office politics, a new intern who didn't know how to use the printer. He laughed at his own jokes. He was so normal, so ordinary, so practiced. I realized then how many times he'd come home like this. After texting her, maybe even after seeing her, I wondered if he had kissed her that morning too. If he held her waist the same way he held mine. If he looked into her eyes and made the same promises he used to make to me. It made my skin crawl. After dinner, I told him I was going to bed early. I needed space. Time to think. I didn't know how to be in the same room with him and pretend I didn't know. He nodded absently, already scrolling through his phone. Okay, babe. I'll finish up some emails and join you later. Emails. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, watching the ceiling fan spin in circles. My mind spun faster. I thought about every moment we'd shared over the past 10 years' vacations. Holidays. The night he proposed. The time I got sick and he stayed up all night by my side. Were any of them real? Or was he always just waiting for something better to come along? I remembered how he looked at me on our wedding day. He cried, real tears. Or at least they seemed real. I remember thinking I'd never seen him so vulnerable. So open. Was that just another performance? The thought broke something inside me. Sometime after midnight, I got up and went into the office. His laptop was on the desk. Open, unlocked. He never thought I'd check. Or maybe he didn't care anymore. I clicked through his emails. Most of them were work-related, but then I saw a folder titled Personal. Inside were messages between him and Lila. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. The oldest one dated back over a year. She called him Jay. He called her darling. They had pet names, inside jokes, plans. One message stopped me cold. It was from 3 weeks ago. I wish you didn't have to go home tonight. It kills me knowing you're next to her. And he replied, soon, baby. I promise. It's just complicated. Complicated. Complicated was a word cowards used when they didn't want to make decisions. I printed the emails, every single one. It took an entire ream of paper. When the last page came out of the printer, I looked at the stack and thought, this is what the end of a marriage Looks like 800 pages of betrayal. I didn't cry, not then. I was too angry for tears, too broken for softness. The next morning, I woke up before James. He was snoring softly, one arm thrown across my side of the bed, the same bed where we made love, where we laughed, where we dreamed about our future. Now it felt like a stranger's bed, like a grave. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the printed emails hidden beneath the bed. In a box I had labeled tax papers. He wouldn't look there, not yet. I got dressed slowly, deliberately, a cream blouse, dark jeans, boots. I curled my hair, applied mascara with a steady hand, and looked at myself in the mirror. My reflection looked calm, serene. But inside I was a hurricane. A quiet storm-building force. James shuffled into the kitchen, still half asleep. "You look nice," he mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. I nodded, forcing a smile. "I have some errands to run. Might stop by the gallery, too." He didn't ask questions. He never did anymore. I drove to my best friend Nora's house. She opened the door in her pajamas, hair a mess, coffee mug in hand. One look at me and her eyes narrowed. "What happened?" I handed her the box. For the next hour, she sat on the floor flipping through the pages while I paced her living room. When she looked up at me, her eyes were glassy. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I knew something was off, but I never imagined." I shook my head. "Me neither." She wrapped her arms around me, held me tight. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But I can't live like this." "I won't." We made a plan. I'd get a new bank account. One he didn't know about. I'd collect copies of important documents, start gathering evidence, protect myself legally. Nora had a cousin who was a divorce attorney. She said she'd set up a meeting for me. The strange thing was I felt powerful. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't waiting for James to change. I wasn't begging for crumbs of affection. I was doing something, taking control. Later that evening, I returned home. James was on the couch watching a crime drama. He looked up and smiled. "Hey, everything okay?" "Yeah," I said, sitting beside him. "Just a busy day." He leaned over and kissed my forehead. I let him touch me with the same lips he used to lie. It was surreal, like acting in a play, reading lines I didn't believe in. He had no idea I was slipping away. No idea that I was watching the clock, counting down the days until I left. That night I lay in bed beside him, wide awake. I listened to his breathing, steady and calm, and I wondered how someone could destroy you so completely and sleep so peacefully. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. But soon, very soon. The following week moved like a slow-motion train wreck. I went through the motions of our life, cooking dinner, folding laundry, laughing politely at his dumb jokes. Each smile felt like a mask glued to my face. I had become an expert in emotional camouflage. Every morning, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my coffee while James got ready for work. He kissed my cheek, grabbed his briefcase, and walked out the door like everything was fine. And every time I imagined screaming at him, tearing the truth open like a wound, but I stayed quiet, because timing was everything. I met with Nora's cousin, Amanda, the divorce lawyer. She was sharp-eyed, firm-voiced, and full of questions I hadn't even thought to ask. "Do you have access to all your financial records? Joint accounts? Property titles? Any prenup?" I felt foolish for not knowing half the answers. But Amanda didn't judge me. She just nodded and handed me a checklist. "Start gathering everything, quietly. The more we know, the safer you'll be when the time comes." When the time comes, the phrase echoed in my mind like a war drum. That night, James brought home takeout and suggested we watch one of our favorite old movies. I sat beside him on the couch, remembering how we used to recite the lines together. Now his laughter felt foreign, like hearing a stranger sing a familiar song. He reached for my hand and I didn't pull away. But I didn't squeeze back either. I was present, but I wasn't there. Later, while he showered, I opened his laptop and copied more of the emails, thread after thread of flirty banter. Plans to meet, even jokes about me. One message from the woman read, "Does your wife suspect anything? Lol, I bet she still makes your lunch every day." He had replied, "She'd never believe it. She still thinks I'm her forever." I closed the laptop and stared at the wall. My hands were shaking, but not from sadness. Not anymore, from rage and from resolve. The next day, I took the afternoon off work and drove to the city. I found the woman's address. Amanda had helped me run a background check and parked across the street from her apartment. I didn't go in. I didn't even get out of the car. I just watched. A woman came out around 4 p.m. Red hair tied up in a bun, yoga mat under one arm. She looked normal, average. Not some vixen, not some seductress. Just a woman, and yet she had willingly inserted herself into someone else's life. Into mine. I didn't feel jealous. I felt something colder. Something steel hard. She had no idea what she had helped destroy. But she would, soon. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the glow from the streetlight outside painting pale patterns on our bedroom wall. James lay beside me, breathing evenly, dreaming who knows what. I wondered if he ever dreamed of her, of the life he imagined with someone else while sleeping next to me. The next morning, I started putting pieces into place. I moved with precision, each step calculated, quiet, deliberate. I transferred half of our joint savings into an account in my name. Amanda had walked me through it, perfectly legal, since I had equal access. I made copies of important documents, our mortgage, car titles, insurance paperwork, and stored them in a folder I labeled recipes, slipping it behind old cookbooks he never touched. Then I started packing. Not boxes, he would notice that. I packed with subtlety. A few items at a time. Sentimental things, important things. Jewelry from my grandmother, photo albums, a few childhood keepsakes. Each day, I took something with me when I left for work and stored it at a friend's place. I even started sleeping in the guest room occasionally. Told James it was because I hadn't been sleeping well. He didn't argue, just kissed my forehead and said, "I hope you feel better soon," like I was the one who'd broken something. The mask I wore had become second nature. I smiled at work, laughed at texts, had lunch with coworkers. But inside, I was a woman on fire, planning her exit like a chess master staring 10 moves ahead. Then one evening it happened. James came home late. Not unusually late, but just enough to tick a box in my mind. His shirt was wrinkled, his phone face down. I watched him from across the dinner table as he poured himself a glass of wine. I asked how work was, and he said, "The usual," without meeting my eyes. I felt an eerie calm settle over me, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. After dinner, I told him I was going for a walk. I needed air. Instead, I drove to the woman's apartment. She wasn't home, but her car was in the lot. I left a note on her windshield. Not threatening, just clear. "You don't know me, but you know my husband. I suggest you ask him what he's told you. And then ask yourself why he never told you my name." I didn't sign it. On the drive home, I felt a strange exhilaration. Like I had reclaimed a small part of myself. The part he thought he'd broken, the version of me that wasn't afraid to be seen, to be angry, to speak. When I got home, James was in the shower. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were still shaking, but my heart was steady. He came out wearing a towel, rubbing his hair dry, and asked, "You okay?" I smiled. "I'm better than I've been in a long time." He looked confused, but said nothing. He had no idea. But soon he would. The next few days passed in a strange kind of silence. James acted normal, too normal. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings, sent me his usual dry text during the day, and came home promptly for dinner. If he suspected anything had shifted, he didn't show it. But I could feel it in the air, the tension, like a wire stretched taut and ready to snap. Then, 3 days after I'd left the note on her car, she called him. I wasn't supposed to know that, of course, but I'd taken precautions. One night a week earlier, while James had been in the shower, I installed a simple recording app on his phone. Nothing fancy, just enough to pick up audio when certain keywords were spoken. Emma, marriage, divorce, truth. Paranoid, maybe, but I didn't want to be blindsided again. So when I saw his phone light up in the kitchen with her name, Lauren, I tapped the screen to listen to the audio file. She was angry. "You lied to me, James. You told me you were separated. You said you were getting a divorce. She left a note on my car, your wife. I didn't even know her name." James's voice was low and clipped. Trying to manage her. "Lauren, calm down. It's not what you think. She's just trying to mess with you." But Lauren wasn't buying it anymore. "You told me she was crazy, but you're the one who lied. Don't contact me again." The call ended. I stared at his phone, heart pounding, not with fear but with satisfaction. He was unraveling. The next evening I confronted him. We were sitting in the living room, pretending to watch some crime drama on TV. I muted the screen and turned to face him. He looked up, surprised. "We need to talk," I said. His smile faltered. "About what?" "I know about Lauren. I've known for a while." His face went blank. Not shocked, he was too well practiced for that. But behind his eyes I saw it, panic. "She's nothing," he said quickly. It didn't mean anything. "It's over." I nodded slowly. "I know. Because she ended it." That caught him off guard. He sat forward. "What do you mean?" "I left her a note. She called you. She knows everything now." He stared at me, realization dawning. You went to her apartment?" I shrugged. "I had to make sure she knew who she was dealing with." He stood up, pacing now. "You had no right." "I had every right," I snapped, standing as well. "You brought her into my life. You lied, you cheated. And you thought I would just keep smiling and serving dinner?" He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I'm not asking for an apology, James." I continued, voice low. "I'm telling you this is the end. I'm filing for divorce." His face turned pale. "You're serious? As serious as you were when you slept with her?" "Probably more." He sat down hard on the couch, hands in his hair. "Emma, please. We can fix this." "No, James," I said, finally calm. "You broke something that can't be fixed." And just like that, I walked out of the room, out of the past, and toward whatever came next. The first night away from James was the hardest. I stayed at a modest hotel just outside of town. The room had floral curtains from another decade, and a constant hum from the hallway. Vending machine. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't even cozy. But it was mine. There were no heavy sighs when I turned on the TV, no awkward silences at dinner. Just me and the quiet. And still, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't James I missed. I missed the years I gave up. The version of myself I abandoned to keep a marriage alive that had long been dying. I grieved for the Emma who had equated love with sacrifice, who thought loyalty meant staying, even when it hurt. I didn't want to be her anymore. The next morning, I packed my things and checked out. I didn't want to drift in limbo. I needed a plan. So I drove to my sister Claire's place. She had always seen James for what he was, even when I didn't. She opened the door, looked me over once, and said, "I was hoping you'd come." I collapsed into her arms. The tears came hard and fast, no graceful crying, just years of pent-up pain. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just held me. Over coffee, I told her everything: James's betrayal, the gaslighting, the emotional neglect. Claire just listened, her hand occasionally brushing mine across the table. When I finished, she said, "I'm proud of you." I frowned. "Proud of me?" "For choosing yourself." I didn't answer, but her words echoed in my chest. I had chosen myself. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to save a crumbling relationship. I was stepping into my own story. With her help, I found a small apartment in the city. It wasn't much, no curated decor or matching dishes, but it was a fresh start. 4 walls that were mine, a place to breathe. Unpacking was strange. My belongings barely filled the space. A suitcase, a few books, some mismatched dishes Claire insisted I'd need. But every drawer I filled felt like a step toward reclaiming myself. I started journaling again. I hadn't in years. At first it was messy, just fragments and scribbles. But it felt honest, unfiltered, free. Each morning I brewed my own coffee, danced in the kitchen, and played whatever music I wanted. I burned half the meals I tried cooking and laughed instead of apologizing. I wore pajamas until noon and didn't feel the need to explain myself. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And in that messy, imperfect space, I found something close to peace. It had been a few weeks since I moved into my new apartment, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was living on my own terms, no one to answer to, no expectations to shrink myself into. The loneliness I feared at first slowly transformed into solitude, not empty, but empowering. I found myself walking more. There was a park near my apartment with a winding path, under tall trees that whispered when the wind passed through. I would sit on a bench with a coffee in hand and watch people go by, children laughing, couples walking hand in hand, old men feeding pigeons. Life was moving, and I was finally a part of it again. One afternoon, I ran into a familiar face. It was Mia, an old colleague from a marketing job I had left years ago. She looked surprised to see me, but her smile was genuine. We sat down for coffee, and before I knew it, I was laughing. Genuinely laughing, for what felt like the first time in forever. She said, "Emma, you seem different, lighter." I nodded. "I think I am." Mia told me about a position opening up at her agency, flexible hours, creative projects. I hesitated. It had been years since I worked. James always insisted my place was at home, and somewhere along the way, I believed him. but the idea stirred something inside me. Excitement, possibility. That evening, I updated my resume for the first time in nearly a decade. It felt like dusting off an old version of myself, one who had dreams and ambition, one who didn't wait for someone else's permission. The next morning, I sent it off. Claire called later that day. She'd been checking in often, and I was grateful for her steady presence. I told her about running into Mia, about the job, about how scared I was. She said fear is natural, but it means you're pushing beyond your limits. That's where growth lives. I knew she was right. Growth wasn't always graceful. Sometimes it was just showing up for yourself even when your voice shakes. A week later, I got the call. I got the job. I danced around my living room like a child. Not because of the paycheck, though that mattered, but because I had chosen this. I had made it happen. Emma, the woman who once whispered her needs into corners, was now rebuilding her life one bold step at a time. That night, I made a real dinner. It wasn't perfect. The rice was overcooked. And I spilled sauce on my only decent blouse, but I sat at the table, lit a candle, and toasted to myself, to healing, to freedom, to beginnings that start with the word enough. And as the candle flickered in the quiet of my new home, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. The first few weeks at my new job were overwhelming in the best way. I had forgotten how good it felt to create, to contribute, to be part of something outside the confines of a relationship that had demanded my silence. Mia introduced me to the team, and they welcomed me with a warmth I didn't expect. I found myself speaking up in meetings, offering ideas, even laughing in the break room without needing to apologize for taking up space. There was no James hovering in the background, no subtle digs about how much time I was spending away from home. It was liberating. One afternoon, as I was gathering my things to leave, Mia stopped by my desk. She smiled, then asked, "How are you really doing?" I paused. It was a question I used to dread because honesty always felt like a risk. But now it felt like an invitation. "I'm rebuilding," I said quietly. "Piece by piece." She nodded like she understood more than I had said aloud. That night, as I walked home, I passed a mirror-like window and caught a glimpse of myself. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her posture was different, straighter, more confident. Her eyes didn't look tired, not in the way they used to. There was something new behind them. Hope. When I reached my apartment, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. I opened it carefully, my stomach tightening, a habit I hadn't yet broken. But inside was a simple typed message. "I miss you. I hope you'll come home. James." The words shouldn't have shaken me, but they did. Not because I wanted to go back, I didn't. But because even now, he believed I could be summoned like a pet who had run too far. As if my freedom was a phase, not a declaration. I sat on the edge of my bed, letter in hand, heart pounding. Then I laughed. A deep, unfiltered laugh that echoed around the room. I tore the letter into pieces and threw it away. That night, I journaled for the first time in years. I wrote everything: the pain, the fear, the anger, the relief. And then, I wrote a letter I would never send. "James, I'm not the woman you controlled. I'm not yours. I never truly was. I'm mine now, and I've never felt more alive." I slept peacefully. The next day, Mia invited me out to a small gallery opening. I almost said no. I had spent so many years shrinking my world, avoiding new people. But something in me whispered, "Say yes." So I did. And that night, surrounded by art and strangers and laughter, I felt a version of myself awaken that I hadn't known was still inside. Curious, brave, whole. It wasn't that I was healed, but I was healing. A few weeks after the gallery night, I started smiling without noticing during quiet walks, in elevators, even while washing dishes. Healing didn't arrive with fireworks. It crept in quietly, replacing fear with stillness. I reached out to old friends James had slowly distanced from me. He never forbid me, but he'd sigh when their names came up or say things like, "They're not aligned with your growth." One of those friends was Lisa, my college roommate. When we met for coffee, she stared at me for a long moment before saying, "You look like yourself again." I nearly cried. That single line felt like truth. We sat for hours. I told her everything about James, the silence, how I lost myself. She held my hand and asked, "Why didn't you call me?" "I didn't think I could," I said quietly. "If I said it out loud, I'd have to leave. And I wasn't ready." She didn't judge. "I'm just glad you're here now." Later that week, I attended a writing workshop at the community center. I had almost backed out, but something pushed me forward. We sat in a circle, notebooks in hand, I read a short story, a fictional piece about a woman reclaiming her voice. My hands trembled. My voice cracked. But when I finished, they clapped genuinely. A man named Elliot came up afterward. "That was powerful," he said. "You should keep going." I nodded, unsure how to respond. But his words stuck with me. So I began writing every morning. Not for anyone, just me. 10 minutes here, 20 there. It felt like planting seeds in soil I thought had long dried up. Mia invited me to a women's panel. She was part of survivors, artists, advocates. One woman shared how she rebuilt her life after a controlling marriage. Another spoke of losing everything, then finding herself. Their stories weren't polished, but they were brave. Mia spoke last. She mentioned me, calling me a friend who reminded me why we fight. Later, over dinner, she looked at me and said, "You don't have to be anyone's perfect. You're enough like this." That night, I looked in the mirror and didn't flinch. I didn't search for flaws or ask what needed fixing. I just looked and saw someone brave. The morning sun filtered through my bedroom window, casting soft golden lines across the floor. I lay there quietly, wrapped in a blanket that felt more like armor than comfort, thinking about how far I'd come. A few months ago, even the act of waking up felt like a punishment. Now it felt like a beginning. I got up, made coffee, and sat by the window. The city buzzed below, cars honking, dogs barking, children laughing. It felt alive, like I was seeing it for the first time. Not through someone else's expectations, not through fear, just me. My phone buzzed with a message from Mia. "Brunch this weekend?" it read. A simple text, but the kind that reminded me I wasn't alone anymore, that I had people, real ones, who saw me, not just the version I'd been told to be. I opened my notebook and started writing. No prompts, no rules, just thoughts, feelings, some messy, some beautiful, but all mine. A line came to me. Healing isn't loud. It whispers. And if you're quiet enough, you can hear yourself again. I let it sit on the page for a while. I reread it, smiling softly. It was true. I'd spent so long silencing myself for the sake of peace that I'd forgotten what my own voice sounded like. Now it rang clear, even in the smallest moments. Later that day, I walked to the park near my apartment. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and sunshine. I sat on a bench and watched families pass by. Kids played tag, couples held hands. An elderly man fed birds from a small paper bag. Life unfolded all around me, ordinary and miraculous. And then, without warning, tears welled in my eyes. Not from sadness, but gratitude. I had survived something I once thought would consume me. I had walked through fire, and though I bore scars, I hadn't let it turn me to ash. A little girl ran past me and laughed, her joy uninhibited and free. I found myself laughing too, quietly at first, then louder. It felt good, real, alive. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows on the path, I stood up and whispered to myself, "I'm proud of you." Not because I'd been perfect, not because I hadn't stumbled, but because I hadn't given up. I had chosen myself every day in quiet ways. And that was enough. My name is Lily Warren, and this was the first chapter of my real story.